All right, Atlanta, you guys ready to get down with it? I guess I'm gonna have to do the Hulk Hogan. Atlanta, you guys ready to get down with it, brother? That was horrible. No, not you guys, me. My Hulk Hogan's horrible. I'd like to introduce right now my friend Michael Exler from the East Coast Horror Group. You guys put your hands together for this man. Make some noise.
What's going on, everybody? I got my partner in crime here, Drew Seidler from the East Coast Horror Group. We did this panel in Indianapolis, and again, it's quite an honor to do the thing panel again. Let's first introduce Mr. Keith David. Next, we have Mr. Tom Waits. Next, Mr. Richard Masser. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Joel Polis. Well, welcome, gentlemen. All right, let's start out with the film shot in Stewart, BC. What do you guys remember from that location, other than it being cold?
Alcohol. That's.
There you go.
That's mostly what I remember is alcohol.
Hyderized.
Get me Hyderized.
Get me Hyderized.
So there was Stewart, British Columbia sits on the border with Alaska. And it's 2 miles from a town called Hyder, Alaska. Hyder, Alaska is in this little kind of bump that the road went through on the way up to the set, which was back in British Columbia, but you had to go through Hyder. Now, alcohol is much, much cheaper in the US than it is in Canada. I believe it still is because they put a lot of taxes on it in Canada. So everybody from Stewart, which were mostly miners and hunters, would go over to Hyder to get their drunk on. And so, so in Hyder, there were 7 bars and about 15 people lived there. And the population of the town at night was about 800, but during the day it was about 15. So the biggest, the most famous, oldest place was a place called the Hyder Inn. And they had I don't know what it was, a Sitka spruce or something, which had been felled, cut all the way lengthwise, polished, and put up, and that was a barn. It was what? It was about 100 feet long. And it was a polished half a tree. And when you went to Hyder, you had to do this thing called getting Hyderized. Turn it over to somebody else.
Getting Hyderized meant that they took this alcohol that was 120 proof,
Everclear.
80 proof.
180.
Everclear.
I don't know what, you guys call it Everclear down here, I think.
Everclear. And you light it on fire.
Yeah, we call it PGA up north. Pure
And you have to drink it straight down, or else you can't get to the next level, whatever that is.
Remember those?
You'd have to buy everybody else in the bar a drink if you didn't take it in one drink, and if you spilled it. So they sat
Or
and
if
watched
you spit
drink.
it out. You remember those 4-ounce juice glass, the long, tall ones you used to see when you were a kid, and you'd get a little tiny thing of juice, but it was like that big. That's what they poured you the PGA.
And they would pour it on they would pour a little bit on the table, light it, and then tell you had to drink it. Don't smell it, just throw it down.
So everybody here obviously was so drunk that they got the story wrong, because what actually happened was, they would put the juice glass up, you'd have to blast it back, then you turn it over on the bar, and then they take it, go like that, and swirl it around, and then as they lifted it up, they would light a match and they'd hold the glass up a little above it, and it would go.
That's right.
And then you were Hyderized.
So Kurt Russell thought that I couldn't drink, so he took me to the bar to get Hyderized, and the bartender behind the bar said, welcome to Hyder, you're going to be Hyderized, you're going to drink this in one drink, you can't spill any, you're going to buy everybody in the bar a drink, blah, blah, blah. And Kurt pushes this drink over to me, and I took it down, and I went, I can't drink. And I went, what do you mean I can't drink? Just did it. I mean, it just burned all the way down.
I was the last one up there. Everybody else got up about a week or so before I did. And so on the way down from the set, which was up on the Salmon Glacier, about 45 minutes, I guess, up this winding, snowy, unbelievably dangerous road. Snowfall capital of the world, the Salmon Glacier. 96 feet on the ground when we were there. And that was in December, early in the season. So on the way down, Kurt asked me, he said, have you been to Hyder yet? I said, well, we just drove through it on the way up. Somebody pointed after me. He said, so you haven't been Hyderized? I said, no, I have not. So we got off the bus. It was a school bus we were in, and everybody else went down to Stewart. And we get off the bus, he takes me in, it was just the two of us in there, so I really could have bought him a drink if I needed to. And I did this, and then the two of us walked back. It was, I don't know, 20 below zero, and which I certainly had no knowledge of. And we walked back along the Salmon River through this extraordinary fjord where the road is right next to the water, and on one side is a sheer cliff, and then there's the river, and then on the other side is a sheer cliff. And the moon was out. We didn't need any light. It was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had in my life, just walking down this freezing cold road with Kurt Russell that night. So anyway, that's what you said. What's the main thing we remember? I think all of us, that's one of the main things we remember.
Also, on the road going up, there were bald eagles on the telephone wires. All the way up, hundreds of bald eagles. It was just extraordinary to be in a place that was, that's where they were.
And that's
It would sometimes along the bus, we'd see the eagles like gliding along the side of the bus with us, getting this spawning salmon.
And that's when they were all but missing from the lower 48. You know, so it was amazing to see a bald eagle. But literally, you drive up, and in every tree there would be 5, 6 bald eagles, and there were thousands of trees. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy. That's where they all lived, I guess. Everybody went to Canada. It was like during the Vietnam War.
You spoke about your trip up to the set on the bus, but there was actually an issue with the bus going up the set one time.
Oh, that was from the plane. Yeah.
That was from the plane. That's like when we first got there, and it was.
This story
late
will
at
also
night.
be told several
Several
times.
times.
Right, several times.
If, because we were most of us, I think, were sleeping, and the bus was going along, and it was a very narrow road, and he was making a turn, and all of a sudden it was like whoop, and one of the tires of the bus went like off the cliff. So we were like, oh shit,
And you look down and there is nothing down.
It was like nothing. First of all, it was in the middle of the night, so you couldn't see anything anyway. And we all just kind of slowly crept off the bus.
Well, but if this was a movie, everybody was asleep, and we're driving along, and suddenly the driver yells, slide. Everybody goes like that, and we feel the bus start to pull out. We feel the bus, thank you, Richard. We feel the bus pull out, and we're okay, we didn't hit anything. But if this was a movie, the next cut, everybody in the bus was in the front, around the driver, staring at the road, and slowly we're making our way toward Stewart.
And Kurt went up to the front of the bus and said, okay, start from the back of the bus and get on the floor and crawl to the front to get off one at a time. Because if you move too quickly, we would not be here. And so he kind of became Mac. He kind of became his character. He kept very cool. In fact, he almost seemed to enjoy the peril, as I recall, whereas I did not. Nature, I mean, it's great and everything, but, get me to a hotel room,
And Peter Maloney had gotten sick for some reason at the
Yeah.
Vancouver airport, so he had been throwing his guts up, and he was in the back of the bus, passed out on the back seat when all this was going on.
And just to remind you, I was not on this bus, so because I came up a week and a half later, so I'm 100% convinced they made this story up for me. It never happened. It never happened. It was just a story they told me because I missed it. That's all.
But one thing is, John Carpenter was waiting for his men at 5:30 in the morning when we arrived. This is before cell phones. He was just waiting for us and shook each of our hands as we got off the bus. Remember that?
Also, John traveled everywhere by helicopter while we schlepped around on the school bus. So it's a good news, bad news story. Yeah, the other thing that I think, I had a different experience because I rode up in a car with a guy, and I rode up in the daytime, and it was like a 4.5-hour ride from the nearest airport. And do you know what, no, of course not, but anybody, you just had a little snow, so maybe you had some sense of it. But you know what one of those nonsense Christmas trees look like when they spray all that white flocking on it? Well, in the real world, that's called hoarfrost, H-O-A-R frost, hoarfrost, as opposed to W-H-O-R-E.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's a whole other. And hoarfrost is these crystals that grow and grow and grow from moisture in the air when the temperature is just the right temperature and the humidity is just right. And on the trip up, there were these balsam pines everywhere on the trip up. Forests and forests filled with these things, covered in hoarfrost, with the only thing that broke up the white was the black bald eagles sitting in all the trees. That was my drive up. So I had a little better drive up than they did.
So what was your initial response when you heard they were remaking the thing? And did any of you see the original 1951, The Thing from Another World?
Well, you mean when they did the prequel? Or our version?
Your
Oh,
version.
that was the original one,
We all went to see the original one. John had screened it for us.
well, I'd seen
We had
it
seen it
20
years
times.
before, too.
I saw it when I was about 8 years old, and it absolutely terrorized me. When James Arness was throwing these dogs around out in the snow, I was just hiding behind a chair in the living room because it would come on TV occasionally. So I had just gotten to New York. I'd been there for just a couple of years when I got the call to come into audition, and I thought, wow, they're doing the thing again? And I was just absolutely charged and thrilled when I got cast in this.
I was disgusted when I heard they were remaking that movie. I mean it, because I thought it was a perfect film. And I still think it's a perfect film. We didn't, luckily, make that film. That's what was great, because they went back to the original
To the short story.
novella, Who Goes There, by James Campbell, and which I only know because Joel asked me to look it up yesterday. Neither of us could remember his first name. And the huge difference is the original story was set in Antarctica, where there is no way to have any kind of rescue. And the first movie was set in Alaska because they wanted a military kind of a theme to it. I don't know why. I guess it was so close to the war or something. I don't know. But and that was also, that's a great story, the original film, because it was Howard Hawks' first AD that directed the film, but everybody knew Howard Hawks directed the film. He's listed as the producer, but he was such a big shot director. He'd done so many amazing films. Look him up. And this was a low-budget sci-fi movie that was kind of beneath him, so they listed the other guy. But the rhythm of it, everything about the movie, it feels so Howard Hawks. The way people talk at the same time, under and over each other, it's just great stuff. And we tried to get a little bit of that fun into this movie, but we actually we made a much darker movie than the original.
I was mad when they did the prequel, As soon as I heard they were doing it, I was like, how dare you, But like, who am I to say that? I don't know. I couldn't get into it when I tried to watch it. But I didn't think it worked. I mean, I thought what John did with our movie was so good they should have just left it. It's kind of like doing Streetcar Named Desire again. I mean, why? You know, you already achieved a certain level. I mean, maybe I have no right, that's hubris, but I thought John did such a great job with this one that they should have just left it alone.
People have been asking me if I've heard about the remake that they're going to make of The Thing. You were one of them, right? And there's apparently a lot of rumors going around that they're remaking the film. What I'll say to that is they're never going to remake this film because this was this film. It isn't going to be this film. It'll be some other film. And it also, no one will ever do what Rob Bottin did in this movie. What Rob Bottin did in this movie had never been done and will never be done again. And for the people who didn't clap, he did all the rubber. He did all the effects. And that was all real. There wasn't a moment of CGI in this film. Not a moment.
Yeah, this was before CGI, and Rob was 23 at the time, and he worked nonstop for a year, 2 years on this, and, you know, almost a nervous exhaustion.
Yeah, he ended up in the hospital.
He did, yeah.
He collapsed. He had a breakdown.
But when John saw his renderings, his drawings of what he was imagining for the film, John just looked at it, and he had heard about him, I think, from The Howling, and he just went, run with it, go with it. And Rob just made magic on the set and for the film.
He was a disciple of Rick Baker's, and he assisted him on a couple of films, and then he went off and did a couple of films on his own, and then he did this, and no one had ever. I mean, I think you didn't. So, did you have to get fit out at the shop? Yeah. You did, and
they make a cast of your face. You know how, like, if you break your arm, you get puts in a cast. They put it in so they have to do that of your face. And I actually had a little breakdown of my own. You have to sit there for 35 minutes
with straws in your nose so you can breathe.
You can't breathe through your mouth.
Seal you completely up.
And I was like, break it! I can't take it. I can't. Just like my character.
Of course, what it was.
Right.
You can't move. But what I was going to say, I did too, just for the bullet hit. It wasn't. I don't know why they had to cast my whole head, but they did. And I think that John wasn't sure how big a mess he wanted the shot to be originally. And when I went to the shop, there were pieces everywhere. And on the ground, over in a corner, was, remember when they bring in the fused bodies of the Norwegian guys, and Wilfred Brimley's going through and snapping off pieces and saying, this is part dog and part. Well, the underlying thing, which is these two heads pulling apart, connected by teeth and tongue. I don't know if I mean, it's a really strong image in the piece. That, unvarnished with any kind of stuff, was lying there. It had just been sculpted and cast. And Rob sculpted that himself and cast it in some kind of acrylic. And that was going to be the basis for this construction. And I walked by this, and this was like one of the most extraordinary, absolutely high art sculptures I'd ever seen in my life. And it was just lying on the floor, waiting to be turned into something else. And when I saw the film, there was a great close-up of this face, but then all the stuff built on top of it, to have the dog fur and the head of the dog and all this other stuff. It was almost, for me, it was almost a disappointment because the other thing was so beautiful and grotesque, and that was more like a horror movie thing. No offense, but there were, because he was a true artist. It's a real tragedy that he's gone. He was a true artist, and I'm sure he would have morphed into something else after CGI came in, and a lot of this stuff is no longer necessary in film. He would have taken this talent, and I would like to think he would have actually gone out and become a sculptor. So, a sculptor of incredibly weird shit, mind you, but a sculptor.
You remember the dog when we first saw it?
Oh yeah.
when the first dog that freaks out with all the things and turns into something. When I walked into the studio the first time, it was sitting in the corner, and I walked in, and I was like, oh shit, because it looked so real. And I remember also that the ASPCA came by and wanted to check us, wanted to investigate because they thought the dog was real also.
Jed, who was my dog, this was, I don't know if anybody ever saw a film called The Adventures of Natty Gann, but he was the lead in that movie, and he went on to do he did a version of White Fang later on. He was an extraordinary special dog. He was half husky and half wolf. And he was 18 months old when we started work on this film. He was very young. He was extremely weird. He was very, very high strung. He had not been around a lot of people. And the guy who trained him, this amazing man named Clint Rao, another artist, by the way. He also trained Mike the dog down and out in Beverly Hills, the amazing border collie who, practically knits a sweater in the movie. I mean, he does incredible stuff. And Clint had this way of training dogs where he never gave them any negative reinforcement stronger than a Jed. That was his strongest correction. Was he would sort of hold the sides of his face very gently, look him in the eye, and he'd go, Jed. And the dog would go, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Sounds like my mother.
And by the way, if you can do this with a dog, it's a great way to train the dog. And what he did was he found things that were natural to the dog, and he reinforced them. And Jed, because wolves don't bark. They don't really growl. They just move. So when a wolf is annoyed, the wolf will go like this. The wolf will go. And you saw Jed do that over and over again, where he'd just go. And that was a natural thing he had. And when he did it to you, which he did it to me a couple of times, Clint would have to go, Jed, leave it. And because the next thing is boom. There is no in between. And so when I don't know if you guys remember, we were rehearsing in this soundstage, in an empty soundstage at some tables. We rehearsed this film, which was unheard of for a film like this, for 2 weeks. And so we're sitting in this basically dark soundstage with some light around these tables. And Clint walks in, and he's sitting by the side. And I'd already been working with him. Whenever I had a break, I would go out and we'd do some stuff. Because Jed had to walk next to me like he was completely at ease. And without looking at me or anybody else, just walk along with me. And we made that happen. The walk down the hallway to the cage, he's just walking with me. If you look at other movies and see dogs walk in other movies, that doesn't happen. They're always looking up at the person because the guy's got food in his hand, or they're looking forward at the trainer. They're never just walking. And Clint wanted to make that happen. And anyway, so I saw Clint sitting over there. I had a break. They were working the section I wasn't in. And I went over to him and I sat down next to them. And Clint said, listen, I want to introduce him to the other people. He hadn't met any of the other cast or even John. He said, and because he knows you now, you can be a bridge. So we'll bring them in one at a time. There's a little area over on the side that he had set up for this. I said, okay, fine. So, and while we're sitting there in the dark, all of a sudden, Jed, who's right here, right next to me, goes like this. And he gives me that look. And Clint just goes, leave it. And I go, hey, all right, brother. And he stopped, and Clint had no idea what I did. So we go off in this room, and I come out, and I get them one at a time. Every single one of you guys came in, so that he could work with them when the dog had to move through the rec room, when in that scene where he's just wandering through under the pool table and everything. And what happened was we'd come in, I'd sit there with whoever came in, and then Clint would work Jed. He'd have him sit, he'd have him do some stuff, and first he would let him just come over and smell. And these guys actually were completely relaxed. But Jed was a very intimidating dog. He was really big, and he had that look in his eye. And everybody was fine except for Charlie Hallahan, who should rest in peace. Charlie was so nervous, and Jed was nervous because Charlie was nervous. And the final thing that Clint would do was give a treat to whoever was there. And then at the very end, after Jed did the final thing he would have him do, he would have you guys give him the treat. And Charlie just dropped it and left. You know, he was like so freaked out. And so Clint said, he can't be there when we do this. And then Kurt came in. Jed wouldn't look at him, he wouldn't go near him, he wouldn't work. He just could not stand Kurt. And Kurt, you know, is an animal guy, loves animals. He also kills animals, but he loves animals, okay? And for some reason, there was something about Kurt's vibe. And Clint thought maybe he'd been around horses. He had some horse smell on him, which Jed was a little skitsy around. But I'm telling you all this just so you know that the stuff that we got in this movie with this dog was so amazing because a man worked this dog like this, and because the dog was so special in and of himself, and because all the people on the set respected the needs of the man who worked the dog and the dog. Because when Jed was working, the set was locked down. Nobody moved, nobody ate food, nobody dropped anything because you could throw him off because he was so young. Later on, he got very relaxed working in films.
If you come by the table, I've got snapshots that I took on the glacier while we were doing the movie, and I've got several photos of Clint working with Jed and also Richard. What was the assistant's name?
I just blanked. I can't.
Oh, okay. In any case, if you're interested, I've got some shots.
It's a miracle I remember your name, Jim.
My name's Terry.
Very old.
So, Mr. David, you actually broke your hand on set. So, if you could tell the audience and the fans how the injury came to be and how it affected your performance.
I did not break my hand on the set. I actually,
Broke it in the bar.
Joel and I, you know, it was our first movie. We, the first almost week, right? Wasn't it like I'm getting. For the first week, we didn't work. You know, they said, "Oh, call back after lunch, and, you know, maybe we'll get to you." But the day before, this was in California, and I'm from New York. I did not drive, and the day before we started shooting, I was driving. I didn't even have my license yet. I was still driving with a permit. And I was driving home, and I hit a speed bump, and I panicked. And there were no cars behind me, except for actually when I started to go, oh, shoot, whoa. And I stepped on the gas instead of the brake, and was zigzagging like this until I hit the center divider. And I had, you know, hellacious accident. And I broke my hand. I broke 2 bones in my hand.
That's when I first heard the name Azusa. Weren't you staying out?
I was at the Azusa exit in West Covina.
That's right, West Covina.
And so I, you know, my hand hurt, but I didn't think anything about it. But I was staying with my girlfriend's mother, who was like a high school teacher, and so she was very calm about it. She'd seen wrecked cars. I was freaked out because I didn't drive before. So we instead of going straight to the hospital that night, I went home thinking that my hand was just sore. Well, 5 o'clock in the morning, I had to go to the hospital. I found out I had 2 broken bones. But in the meantime, my hand had swelled up like a boxing glove. And so Larry and
Larry Franco was
Larry
the
Franco.
first AD and associate producer.
and Larry and the director were walking toward me. And so I knew my hand, I wanted to say something first. So I kind of walked like this toward him. And then I slowly dropped my hand. And the look on their faces as they got to me is like, by the time they got, what the fuck happened to your hand? And I'm like, blah, blah. And so they immediately rushed me to the hospital. I immediately had an operation. And for the first 6 weeks of shooting, if you notice in the movie, you never see my left hand. It's always hidden by the table. It's always, not until the end of the film when I had to use the axe to break the door down did you ever see my left hand.
I never heard that story. I knew you had broken your hand.
Oh, and, you know, and as a matter of fact, when in that scene, there was a scene once we got up there where I had to drive the tractor, and they said, "Oh no, no, get somebody." I didn't think it was funny then.
You didn't think much was funny then.
So tell us your impressions of how the studio marketed the film. There's been a few things said about that, so I want to get your impression about that.
Go ahead, Richard. You got the inside
Well,
of this one.
it's not so much how the studio. I mean, it's partly that, but what happened was we got caught in a kind of Universal Pictures problem. They had a very, very big movie that they expected monstrous box office from, called The Cat People. A horrible, horrible movie with Nastasia Kinski, who was a beautiful woman and not a great actress, except she was very good in tests, but aside from that, not a great actress. But she was supposed to be a cat, and she looked great as a cat. But it was a horrible movie. And the whole time we were shooting, or a lot of when we were shooting, there were these panthers and tigers and all kinds of stuff in cages on sand stages around us at Universal City. And what happened was Cat People was such a mess, an unholy mess, they couldn't release it on time. And they had a slot, and they just took the thing and they threw it in the slot. So it wasn't really planned, it wasn't really well thought out, they really didn't publicize it. And the picture got mixed reviews, but it's not a critic's movie, it's an audience movie. And what happened was, you know, and look, there are a lot of great films represented here, and there are a lot of films that only some people would consider to be great, and other people wouldn't necessarily consider to be great. This was a film that kind of crossed over, or could have, if it had been marketed correctly. It was science fiction, it was horror, and it was also a really interesting movie about a group of people stuck in this horrible situation. And for all those reasons, it could have been marketed in a way that could have found a very broad audience.
Well, the other thing was that they released it the week after E.T. opened, and the week before Poltergeist opened. And we just got lost because they did not do enough publicity, and there was.
But that was because of the Cat People.
Yeah, right.
I never knew that, because I always thought, I mean, whoever thought of this should have got life, you know, I mean, because it was like, it was sort of like a winter movie. It should have come out in October, or at least Easter release, you know, but it just, in the middle of the summertime, it was like, this is not a good time.
So this was John's first major studio production. You guys were all mostly from the stage. Let's talk about some of your experiences working with John and your time on the studio and how you guys meshed.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story, which is not my story. It's actually Wilford Brimley's story. Brimley was always a cranky old man. I think he was born a cranky old man. And nice man. We all did very well together. We all worked very well together. But he, as the movie went along, he progressively got more and more cynical about what we were doing, and especially about John and Dean Cundy and Larry Franco. Now, the three of them started out together. They all did Halloween. They did a lot of films together before this, well, a few. And they were really good friends. And they were constantly, I don't know where this started, but John was constantly goosing, either, you know, sticking his thumb up either Dean Cundy's ass or Franco's ass. They were doing it to each other all the time. It was just like, it was really junior high school stuff. And at one point, you know, this happened while we were working on something, and then we had a break and they were lighting, And we're sitting there and we're having some really in-depth conversation about our relationships, because we're all actors from New York, from Juilliard, from Yale, from all, and we were really serious actors. And we had this rehearsal, and we had developed all these, Keith and I had this amazing thing going, which mostly, there's a couple of moments, but we did some great work, which you never saw, because we reshot a third of the movie up in Alaska, because John decided it was a boring movie, because we shot all the Hollywood stuff first, and then they did a rough assemblage, and when John looked at it, he said, "This is a boring movie about a bunch of guys sitting around talking." Well, yeah, you hadn't shot any of the outside stuff yet, and you hadn't put any of the effects in. But so he panicked, and he reshot a whole bunch of scenes. Like the scene where Kurt is going, "I know I'm human," and outside, where he burns the bed. That was all. We did that scene in the rec room, and it was a great scene, because we were trapped. And then he opened it up, because he was bored. So, it's still good, but it was great. Anyway, so what happened was, we're having this really serious conversation about all this stuff, and Brinley's sitting next to me, and he just starts going, "Oh, boys. And he's laughing, and we go, "What?" He said, you guys, are you paying attention to what's going on here? Do you watch them playing grab ass out there all the time? He says, "You think this movie is about us? This movie isn't about us, it's about the rubber guy." And he said, "Stop thinking about all this stuff." So what happened, that was the tone of the film on the set, was a bunch of teenage boys. And every time, there were no women at all. So every time a woman walked onto the set, we had a thing we said, which it's not rude, so I'll say it, but we would go, "Salmon in the trap!" And to let everybody know there was a woman on this. I don't know what it meant. I don't know why we first said it.
Was that the rudest thing you've ever heard?
But nobody, none of the women ever knew what it meant.
Jamie Lee Curtis came one day when we were shooting.
Yeah.
They were like, "Salmon in the trap, salmon in the trap." And I look up and there's this beautiful woman, and I'm like, she is definitely a salmon in the trap.
And the two editors were women, and they were, every time they walked on the set, it was like, you can't imagine how crazy it is when it's just boys on the set. It's just bad.
How about Tara and the two cooks?
Oh my God, it's cooks.
They
Up
were
north.
gorgeous. Oh my God! And
And
every man that came with a tray was like,
And they turned out food in the middle of nowhere that was unbelievable.
Great food.
So with a lot of horror films, there's social commentary involved. Doing research, it was saying the Carpenter's social commentary could have been the AIDS epidemic. Can you guys speak a little bit about that?
Well, when the original story was written, it was 1939, and people were just finding out what Stalin was doing in Russia. And when the movie came out in 1951, if you're familiar with the film, like the last thing that the reporter says,
Keep watching the skies.
"Look to the skies, look to the skies." And that was all about, right before the McCarthy era really kicked in. So there was a paranoia in the air that this movie addressed at the time.
I have to tell you, I think that's revisionist
Yeah,
history.
I don't remember
that was
anything
not
like
in
that.
anybody's mind.
Right.
This was before it was ever.
In fact,
this was before
Yeah,
AIDS was
it
ever
needs
called AIDS. It wasn't even called what was it called? Yeah, no, but it was something with a griff, or I can't remember what it's called. It was G something. It was the gay-related grid. It was originally called grid. And way before that even happened is when we made this movie. We made this movie in what was it? 81, yeah. And this stuff really started popping after that. So I think that's really revisionist history. We picked up on the original communist fear of the other, okay? That paranoia, but and remember in the Hawks movie, apologies to this first AD, in the Hawks movie, it was literally the other. It was a being who was a being that reproduced himself in a way, or itself in a way that was unimaginable, in that it would, you know, was spores and, you know, and could grow on blood and, you know.
It's a vegetable.
Yeah. But in our movie, it came from within. So the bad guy was hidden and inside the other people. Now, I understand why people relate that to AIDS, but I promise you, John was not being prophetic, nor was Bill Lancaster being prophetic, because we didn't know. We didn't know that.
Yeah, but I always felt that, that you had a group of men stuck in a very small place, and there was a virus. It could have been a virus. This was an alien virus. Something was going around that you didn't know who had it, how you got it, how you could destroy it. So even though I don't think John consciously did that, it was coincidental that it came out at a time when something in the air was causing enormous fear around.
Like I said, I mean, there was
Once again, I'm saying, I'm not saying that
there was no
intentional in any
conscious
way.
thought of that, and right, it wasn't called AIDS until like the end of '82, beginning of '83.
Yeah.
You know, so
Nobody knew.
you know, if anybody made that connection, it was far after that.
I think this is completely revisionism. My opinion, Joel has a different.
Now, when the script was distributed, were you aware whenever you were going to be host of the Parasite, or the cast members were going to be host, or did you not know because maybe it would help acting not knowing that he was going to be host of the Parasite or Child would be?
No, he didn't hand out pieces of the script. We read the whole thing. The only thing that nobody knew was the end. And you can talk
And he
about
filmed
that.
a couple endings. There were a couple of endings were filmed.
I just remember, and you know, memory is selective. I just remember it ain't me. And we now that you mention it, we did film it a couple of ways, but ultimately he said, you play it like it's not you, you play it like it's not you. And that's how we wanted to play. So we didn't know if it was, you know, and we just had a sort of healthy caution with each other, because it could be, but it probably wasn't. But as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't me. But as far as if the thing was you, you wouldn't know it. That's sort of what we ultimately came to. Because remember that, you know, at the end of the 2 weeks, and we were still sort of, I mean, because it was Richard and Charlie were the two kind of,
Well, I was the red herring.
you know.
It was never me. I could
But
say
one,
that.
I mean, but
Totally.
but you guys were the kind of, you know, sci-fi experts. I mean, as far as trying to be consistent with what you know, the premise to what you came up, you know, that you started with, we have to be consistent with that.
I hate that. Don't you hate that? When you set up a world, you set up a reality, and then you cheat on the world? Unacceptable. It's unacceptable. So all through the movie, I would go, you can't do that. We just said that doesn't happen that way. And John would go, Jesus Christ. No, he's right. Me and Hallahan
And the
were-
three of us, I mean, Tommy and Joel we had a scene walking down the hall, and we had just finished rehearsing for 2 weeks, discussing this moment. And, you know, when you're on the movie set, you go on a bell. Once you go on the bell, that means that we're about to shoot. And the director puts on the headphones, and he's listening, you know, because for some reason, there was a huge delay between the bell and action. So while we were waiting, the three of us were sitting, were talking.
And they were in a walk and talk.
And we were in a walk and talk.
So they each had radio mics on.
So
Important
we're
to know
talking about, I don't know why John is going to shoot this. He don't want to cut it, because, I mean, we already discussed this. You said that this doesn't happen. And we weren't saying anything that we could not, did not, or would not say in front of him. But because we were on the mics, and he was on headphones, to him it sounded like we were having this clandestine conversation. And I have never, I've done 2 pictures with John, and I've never, ever heard him raise his voice, really. Until that day, when he came around the corner, we're shooting this fucking scene because I want the fucking scene. I want this fucking scene. And the three of us were sitting there shitting in our pants as well. Oh, wait, I didn't mean to say that.
I'm going to tell one final thing. Charlie Hallahan's head comes off, as you all know, after Dick Dysart's arms are cut off in Charlie's gut. Okay, and we're shooting this sequence. I'm bragging. Okay, we're shooting this sequence, and we're all in the room, and the guy, by the way, the guy who in the shot comes up and does this without his arms, that's also not CGI. That was an amputated man who had both his arms amputated, that was tricked out with stumps that had blood tubes in them, and he was in makeup for 5 hours to get him ready for that, to put Dysart's face on and to put these pumps in. And this was a guy who lost his arms in an industrial accident, almost exactly in the way that they were chopped off at Charlie's stomach. So we were horrified by this, but he had a great time. He loved doing it. He loved being there. We all thought it was horrible. But anyway, what happens is Charlie's head goes skittering across the floor. And we shoot the sequence, and we shoot it in a master, and David Clinton says the best line in the movie. You got to be fucking kidding me, okay? Best line in the movie. And we finish shooting this, and John says, okay, we're in the wrong set, let's move, or Larry Franco said that. I said, wait a minute. He said, what? And I said, you didn't shoot any coverage on Clinton. He said, what are you talking about? Now, he had storyboarded every single moment of this film. And there was no storyboard frame of David Clinton saying the line because he was going to play it on the head, skittering out. That was John's decision before he ever shot a foot of film. I said, you have to shoot David saying the line. If you don't shoot David saying the line, you will regret this for the rest of your life. And I just badgered him until he finally said, all right, fuck it, shoot it. Come on, let's set it up. And he shot it. And hello, it's the biggest laugh in the movie. And it wouldn't have been there. So I take credit for that.
All right, we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question?
Personal favorite horror movies for the cast.
Wow.
House on a Haunted Hill.
Original.
The original.
Clear that up.
I'd have to say The Exorcist. The Exorcist.
I would go with that too. I'll tell you why. For me, it was the first time in my life I'd ever seen anything that outrageous done that well.
The Exorcist, for me, but also Dracula, the original Dracula.
You mean with the Bela?
No, Bela Lugosi.
With Bela Lugosi?
Yeah.
Hey, this is for all you guys. Do you guys lament the fact that all the films in Hollywood now are all CGI? They don't develop characters anymore. Kind of like, I don't know, kind of like what Robert Redford talked about. I don't know if you read one of his interviews in the Men's Journal, but he's lamenting the fact that there's no, everything's big and stuff gets blown up and there's no really character.
Yeah. I just want to say about John, you asked us a question about what it was like working with John, and after rehearsing with him for 2 weeks, he brought each one of us into his trailer and had like a private conversation about the character. And I don't think directors have that kind of sensitivity. It doesn't show to me in movies. Everything seems, they shoot the deal memo, you know? They don't shoot the heart and soul of the character. But I thought John Carpenter did that in our picture. That's what I said.
It's economics. And, you know, the only way to get all of us out of our living rooms and away from our big screen TVs, and no matter how little money anybody in the United States has anymore, they have a flat screen big screen TV. And the only way to get us up off our asses and into a theater is to put something there that we can't experience in our living rooms. And it's just a fact. And of course, we regret it as actors because, A, you know, we're interesting people, and we're older, and most of that stuff is younger, in my opinion, less interesting people, okay? But I don't entirely agree with what my friend Thomas here just said, because I think a lot of films get made with a tremendous amount of heart, but not in this genre, not in the sci-fi, action, thriller genre. I think in horror, in a way, sometimes more than in some of the others, because those movies are almost always about people interacting with each other. The fact that they fall into formulaic constructs sometimes can get, you know, old after a while. But you guys just, when they get old, people turn away from them and say, no, it doesn't work for me.
But also a film like Alien, which I love. You connect with those characters in the situation they're in because they're so well developed and so well acted. And I feel, well, as Richard just said, it's formulaic. When they don't invest that kind of attention to the characters and the actors on screen, you're losing an ability to really connect, even in a science fiction or horror.
Well, look, I'm sorry. In my opinion, what's it called? District 9, great movie. Great movie for acting, great movie for character, great movie filled with creatures that don't exist, moving through a make-believe avatar. Great movie, all about character. So I don't think, that's why I'm saying, I don't, you know, and for all the bad rap that, what's his name? The Avatar, help me.
Cameron.
For all the bad rap he gets about what a lunatic he is, I mean, go watch The Abyss. It's a great character movie, a great character movie. Avatar is a great character movie. He cares desperately about his characters. He wants to control every second of what you get to see. So he's very controlling of the audience, but I think he really supports his actors. So, and that's why I don't entirely agree with what Tom said. But what's driving the industry is you got to get asses in the seats. You got to get eyeballs on the screen. And if everybody's sitting home and it's just as good at there, and you can watch it 25 times because you downloaded it instead of once for $12, you know, it's hard to compete with that. And you got to come up with pretty amazing stuff.
All right, well, we're out of time. We just want to thank you again for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, the cast of the
Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Michael and Drew from the East Coast Horror Group.